The camel bell stops, and you reach for a cord-wrapped manuscript while salt settles beside you. Timbuktu's gold can wait. A goat has found the market's cleanest paper. If these evenings genuinely help, you might like or subscribe. Share your location and local time. Let the room dim and settle where your body asks least. In early 16th century Timbuktu under Songhai rule, a bookseller's assistant must inspect and deliver the parcel before wind, traffic, and several elbows soil it. The bundle holds paper and a manuscript rather than gold, so keeping it clean matters before any larger story about the city can begin. The name of this assistant has not survived. He is a careful composite built from what the records do preserve: imported books, active copying, judges and teachers, caravan traffic, and a city where scholarship belonged to daily work. You take the parcel with both hands because one-handed confidence is useful only until the cord slips. The outer cloth is grey with travel, but the knot remains firm. A second man calls out the owner's name. You repeat it, then touch the small mark on the wrapping that distinguishes this bundle from two others. Around your ankles, porters roll a salt slab onto a mat. It lands with a dull weight. The manuscript does not move at all, which is precisely the kind of behavior you want from paper at this moment. Paper that has crossed the Sahara has already survived the hardest part of its life. The remaining risks are all local, and most of them are people. Timbuktu is not an isolated dot waiting to be discovered by outsiders. It sits near the meeting of long systems. Desert routes bring animals, merchants, salt, cloth, metal goods, paper, and books from the north. The Niger and its ports connect the city to people and goods moving through the western Sudan. Gold travels through networks from production zones farther south and west. These things do not arrive as one theatrical exchange, a slab of salt neatly balanced against a glittering heap. Today the salt belongs to one merchant, the paper to another, and the gold that may settle an account could have passed through several hands already. Your bundle has a simpler ambition. It wishes to cross the market without becoming a sample of the market. Salt arrives from the desert, gold moves through southern networks, and paper comes in with both. The city's position is the whole reason all three meet here. You carry the parcel beneath your left arm and keep your right hand free to clear a path. The market has no obligation to arrange itself for fragile cargo. A camel lowers its head toward a basket. A porter backs away from a salt slab. Two buyers have reached the stage of bargaining, in which each repeats the same number with greater moral conviction. You wait for a gap, then move. The parcel contains material that has crossed the Sahara at considerable cost. Paper may have come from North Africa or farther east through Islamic commercial networks. A finished manuscript may have been copied elsewhere, bought by a traveller, or commissioned for a scholar. None of those routes makes the book foreign to Timbuktu. The city receives texts, studies them, copies them, comments on them, and makes them part of local life. A book that arrived from Cairo or Fez does not stay foreign for long. Within a generation there may be a local copy, a local commentary, and a local argument about it. Manuscripts came from North Africa and Egypt, and returning pilgrims could bring or copy texts on the way home. The supply had several channels rather than one. At the bookseller's shade, you set the bundle on a low board rather than on the ground. First comes the cord. You loosen it without cutting, because good cord has already completed one desert crossing, and may be invited to undertake another. The cloth opens. Inside lies a paper packet and a bound volume protected by an additional wrapper. You inspect the outer leaves for moisture, tears and grit. Dry weather often helps paper survive here, but dry does not mean invulnerable. Dust abrades, hands stain, insects eat. A sudden rain finds the one roof patch everyone intended to repair yesterday. The bookseller watches your fingers, not because he doubts you, but because a valuable manuscript has the social effect of making every nearby adult an expert in how someone else should hold it. The dry air is genuinely kind to paper. Dust, damp, insects and handling are not. and 3 of those 4 are standing in this lane right now. The first leaves a sound. You lift one edge, then replace it before the wind can volunteer an opinion. The writing is Arabic, the learned language of a broad Islamic world. But Timbuktu's manuscript culture is not merely a distant tradition deposited at the desert's edge. Scholars here teach, debate, write, own books and train students. Local hands copy texts in scripts developed across West Africa. Families and teachers build collections. A manuscript can enter as merchandise and leave the market as a tool for law, devotion, grammar, calculation or commentary. That change is not mystical, it is work. Someone pays for paper. Someone prepares ink. Someone sits long enough to copy a line correctly, then sits longer because the line was not correct after all. Copying was an industry here rather than a hobby. Demand came from judges, teachers, students and booksellers who all needed working texts instead of ornaments. A clerk beside the bookseller reads the owner's name from the note and makes a small entry of the arrival. The exact form of such a market record is not recoverable for this transaction, so we need not invent one. What matters is the sequence. Identify, inspect, acknowledge, deliver. You repeat the destination. It is a scholar's household near one of the city's teaching mosques. The word university is tempting, because it is familiar, but it brings the wrong building into view. Sankor and other mosques were centers of worship and instruction, with teaching organized through scholars and their students rather than through one modern campus, registrar, or common degree office. Your delivery is not going to an admissions department. It is going to a man who expects the correct parcel before his lesson, which can feel considerably more immediate. There is no single central campus to deliver to. Learning sits in mosques, in households, and in the rooms of particular men with particular reputations. The city's intellectual high point is placed in the 15th and 16th centuries, which is the world this lane belongs to. Before you leave, the bookseller checks the binding through its wrapper. West African manuscripts often carry distinctive leather covers and incised decoration, though the bundle in your hands need not display every known feature. Its cover is firm enough for transport. The paper packet beside it is more vulnerable, so you place both inside a clean cloth of your own and retie the outer cord. Across the lane, a merchant taps the edge of a salt slab, assessing cracks. Salt has traveled south from Saharan deposits in blocks heavy enough to require patient loading. Gold, meanwhile, has moved through different chains of miners, traders, river carriers, brokers, and officials. Timbuktu profits from connecting such movements, not from producing every valuable thing within its walls. The book's journey therefore continues through inspection rather than ending at arrival. A cover that held through travel must now support reading, lending, and storage, each with a different kind of wear. Travel wear and reading wear are different problems. A binding that survived a camel may still fail under a student who opens it flat every afternoon. You step out with the parcel held high against your ribs. The lane narrows between earthen walls. Timbuktu stands near the Sahara and not directly on the Niger's main channel, so goods arriving by water still require transfer from river landings and nearby ports. Every change of carrier creates another chance for delay, loss, or misunderstanding. It also creates employment. Boatmen, animal handlers, porters, hosts, brokers, guards, weighers, sellers, and people who know which doorway belongs to which family. The city becomes important because people make connections reliable enough to use again. Your contribution is modest. You recognize the next turn and ignore a confident stranger who points the other way. He may know many things. He does not know this delivery route, a distinction the parcel will appreciate in silence. Route knowledge is not transferable. The man who knows the river stage does not know this lane, and the lane is what stands between here and delivery. Boats bring goods to the river ports, and camels bring salt from the desert. Somebody has to move each load the last distance by hand. At a shaded corner, you pause while 3 loaded animals pass. Their drivers keep the column tight enough to prevent another group from cutting through. No surviving rulebook lets us describe every traffic custom in the city, yet crowded market movement has its own visible logic. Heavy loads receive space because a salt slab cannot apologize after landing on a foot. A boy carrying water waits beside you. An older porter signals when the final camel has cleared. You move together, then separate. The parcel remains dry. Its value is not easily compared with the salt. Leo Africanus, a North African traveller writing from his early 16th century visit, later praised Timbuktu's market for manuscript books and claimed exceptional profit in them. His report matters, but it is a visitor's superlative, not an audited table of prices. He was writing to impress readers far away. That does not make him wrong about the book trade, only unreliable about exactly how profitable it was. That caution does not make the book trade small. A market can be vigorous without allowing us to rank every sale. Imported manuscripts were costly because paper, copying, travel, risk, and scholarly demand all had prices. A single useful text might serve a teacher, pass among students, collect notes, be copied again, and remain in a household. The wealth it generated was not only the seller's profit, it also appeared as instruction, legal advice, records, reputation, and the trained labor of later copyists. You adjust the knot as you walk. The cord has shifted half a finger's width, which is enough to occupy your full attention. The city may be linking continents, but your present empire extends from your elbow to the parcel, and its border requires constant patrol. A manuscript's value is layered: the paper, the copying labor, the text itself, and whoever can teach from it. Losing it would destroy 4 different things at once. Verse was sometimes used as a memory aid in legal instruction, so a text could be built to be carried in the head as well as the hand. The scholar's quarter grows quieter, though not quiet. Recitation carries from a doorway. A student repeats a passage in a measured voice, stops, and begins again after correction. Written and oral learning support one another here. A text can be read aloud, memorized, explained, disputed, and copied. The manuscript does not replace the teacher, and memory does not make the manuscript unnecessary. Each catches what the other might lose. You pass a wall whose surface shows a repaired patch of earth. The same principle is visible there. A durable city is not one that never changes. It is one whose residents know how to notice small damage before wind and rain enlarge it. Paper and walls both survive by attention, though the wall is less likely to object when a student writes in its margin. Both the books and the buildings here are made of materials that need attending to. Neither survives by being left alone. At the household gate, no one answers the first knock. You shift the parcel away from the wall and knock again. A student appears with ink on 2 fingers and the expression of a person interrupted during a difficult sentence. You give the owner's name and state the bookseller's. He reaches for the package. You do not release it. The delivery must be acknowledged by the adult who arranged it, or by the household member named for receipt. This is not stubbornness for its own sake. Similar wrappings, spoken instructions, and busy rooms can create errors that no amount of later confidence will repair. The student calls inside. While you wait, the wind lifts dust along the lane and places a fine layer on everything except, so far, the object everyone is trying to protect. Handoffs are where things go wrong. The parcel has crossed a desert without incident and could still be ruined by an ordinary afternoon of waiting. The scholar's assistant comes to the gate and repeats the identifying details. He knows the expected paper quantity and the title of the bound text. You loosen the cord enough for him to check the inner wrapper. No dramatic treasure appears. There is no gold leaf flashing into the lane, no secret map, no lost science requiring a sudden musical chord. There is paper, handwriting, binding, and the promise of labor. That ordinariness is the important thing. Timbuktu's intellectual life depended on texts being bought, carried, copied, taught, corrected, inherited, and cared for. A book becomes historically impressive only after many ordinary hands refuse to drop it, misplace it, soak it, misread it, or allow a goat to eat the corner. Nothing about this is glamorous, and that is the point. What survives to be admired centuries later survived because of unremarkable competence. The assistant invites you into the courtyard while he finds the payment note. You set the parcel on a woven mat away from the doorway. A low shelf holds wrapped volumes. Their number is not enormous, and it need not be. Modern claims about hundreds of thousands of surviving Timbuktu manuscripts describe broad, often still catalogued heritage, not the contents of every 16th century room. Likewise, confident figures for schools, students, or libraries can conceal uncertain evidence. This household has what the scene requires and no more. Several books in use, loose paper, a writing board, ink, cord, cloth, and people who know their value. The assistant checks the outer cloth for grit, then folds it inward so the dirty surface cannot touch the clean wrapper. You approve without needing to say so. Modern totals for Timbuktu's manuscripts have often run ahead of careful cataloguing. What is certain is that the collections were real, working, and mostly held by families. Large-scale modern inventory work has found substantial holdings in private libraries. The counting is still going on, which is why cautious numbers are the honest ones. While the note is found, you hear part of a lesson. The subject is law, a field securely prominent in Timbuktu's manuscript tradition. A teacher asks for the reasoning behind a rule of sale. The student answers from memory, then turns to a text when the teacher requests the exact wording. Commerce and scholarship meet here without becoming the same occupation. Merchants need contracts, inheritance rules, ethical guidance, arithmetic, and trusted judgments. Scholars live in a city shaped by trade, while traders operate in a society where learning carries authority. The salt slab in the market and the legal passage in this courtyard need not be exchanged directly to belong to one urban system. One moves bodies and goods. The other helps people decide what a fair or lawful transaction is supposed to mean. Law and commerce were not separate worlds here. Inheritance, debt, partnership, and sale were exactly the questions the legal texts existed to settle. The missing note emerges from beneath a writing board. No one comments on this, which suggests the household has agreed that the note was always exactly where it should have been. The assistant confirms the terms and hands you a receipt token for the bookseller. You retie the parcel for him, using a flatter knot that will rest beneath the shelf cloth. He carries it to the mat and kneels. The delivery has crossed desert route, market, lane, gate, and household without losing its identity. That sequence is the first answer to the title. Timbuktu became a city of books because commercial networks could bring paper and manuscripts, but also because residents created demand, knowledge, copying skill, institutions, and careful routines at the far end of the journey. The trade brought books. The city made them matter, which is a different achievement and much harder to arrange. You leave the courtyard with the receipt token in your palm. Outside, a porter rolls another salt slab toward a merchant's store. Its weight, distance, and usefulness give it value, but there is no universal equation in which one slab always equals one measure of gold. Prices vary with place, season, quality, transport, politics, and need. Gold, too, moves in different forms and through different networks. It may settle accounts, purchase imports, or continue north. The phrase gold and salt names major currents, not a single marketplace trick. Books belong beside them because paper and manuscripts also moved through commerce, then acquired further value in local study. Timbuktu did not simply receive three famous objects. It coordinated people who could move, judge, use, and redistribute them. Gold, salt, and paper did not swap for one another in any tidy ratio. They were separate currents that happened to pass through the same streets. Back at the bookseller's shade, you place the receipt token beside the arrival entry. The seller turns it once, recognizes the mark, and sets it in a small container. One task is finished. but the market has not paused in respect. A buyer wants loose paper. A teacher's servant asks whether a promised commentary has arrived. A caravan broker disputes the condition of a wrapper. These requests reveal another part of the city's strength. A trading centre does not become a centre of learning merely because books pass through it. The books must find readers, and readers must possess enough training and means to ask for particular works. Demand is built slowly through teaching relationships, legal offices, mosques, households, travel, and reputation. You reach for the next packet, which is lighter and therefore somehow more determined to escape. Demand was specific. A judge wanted a working legal text. A student wanted a copy he could annotate, and a bookseller wanted whichever of those he could sell twice. A securely dated copy of Al-Qayrawani's Risala is associated with 16th century Timbuktu, exactly the sort of text a working legal library would need. The loose paper is counted in quires rather than treated as an anonymous heap. You align the edges and look for damaged sheets. Paper is both a commodity and the beginning of future manuscripts. A blank leaf can become a student's exercise, a merchant's agreement, a scholar's letter, a legal opinion, or a copy of a trusted text. Its eventual subject cannot be read from its present whiteness. The bookseller quotes a price. The buyer objects. Their bargaining does not tell us that paper cost a fixed amount across Timbuktu, only that quality and scarcity mattered. You hold the stack while they speak. A gust presses against the top sheet. Your thumb follows it instantly. Anyone may admire a finished book. Blank paper requires faith, money, and a person willing to prevent the wind from beginning the composition. The sheets stay between the boards while the agreement is completed, protected from hands that have other business. Blank paper was itself an import, and itself valuable. Before a word is written, the sheets have already crossed a desert and been paid for. Across the market, the salt merchant has begun dividing his delivery. Some slabs will remain intact for onward trade. Others may be broken into smaller portions. The path of each piece depends on buyers and destinations beyond the scene. Salt is necessary in diet and preservation, but its movement also reflects regional specialization. A mine in the Sahara, a caravan route, a city near river connections, and consumers farther south are joined by people who need one another's goods. Gold links another set of places and exchanges. Timbuktu's location gives merchants access to both desert and river worlds, yet location alone does no lifting. A crossroads without handlers, brokers, water carriers, hosts, officials, craftspeople, and reliable knowledge is only a difficult place where two roads happen to meet. A porter who knows the river landing may never travel to the mine, while a caravan guide may never enter the scholar's lesson. Their partial knowledge connects because the handoffs are repeated and understood. Nobody in the chain sees the whole of it. The system works because each person knows their own segment and exactly where the next one begins. The paper buyer finally agrees to a quantity. You place the sheets between two firmer boards, then bind them with cloth. No surviving account describes this particular sale or its wrapping, but the protection answers well-supported problems. Paper is costly, transport is rough, and dust is persistent. The buyer gives a destination near a judge's household. You repeat it. A market assistant beside you repeats it again, adding a landmark. The three versions now agree. This is how ordinary reliability grows, not through a grand decree that every parcel shall arrive, but through names spoken twice, knots checked once more, and workers who understand that a wrong doorway can consume an afternoon. The buyer starts to explain the route you already know. You let him finish. Expertise sometimes includes allowing instructions to complete their own journey. You have done this delivery often enough that the instructions are unnecessary. Letting them finish anyway costs nothing and saves a conversation. The second route passes closer to Sankor. The mosque is not a sealed ivory tower, and the city around it is not merely a backdrop for scholarship. Worship, teaching, households, markets, and legal life overlap. Students attach themselves to particular teachers. Instruction may occur in mosque spaces or homes, and books circulate through personal relationships. Calling this a university can be useful only if the explanation follows immediately. It was not one centralized institution built on the modern model. You hear several voices reading, each at a different pace. The result is less like solemn silence than disciplined concentration with neighbors. A man carrying a basket threads between two groups. He does not stop to marvel that learning exists in Africa. It is part of the city he is navigating. Scholarship here needs no defending and no explaining. It is simply one of the things the city does, alongside trading salt and repairing walls. Sankor, Jingariba, and Sidi Yahya anchor the city's religious and scholarly life, and all three are earthen buildings that depend on maintenance. Near the judge's lane, the air changes. Someone has dampened the ground outside a doorway to settle dust. You slow so the wrapped paper does not brush a wall. The judge's clerk receives the bundle and checks the count. Legal culture is one reason paper and books matter here. Surviving manuscripts and known works address inheritance, sales, loans, governance, ethical conduct, and disputes. They also preserve theology, grammar, devotional works, history, arithmetic, medicine, and astronomy across the broader tradition. We must be careful with dates. A manuscript copied in the 18th century cannot be placed on this 16th century mat merely because it later survived in Timbuktu. The subjects tell us about a long intellectual world. Securely dated works and copies tell us what may enter a particular scene. The surviving subjects run from law and inheritance through arithmetic, astronomy, medicine, ethics, and agriculture. What we cannot always do is date a specific volume into a specific room. Most surviving manuscripts date from the 16th century onward. That is a real tradition rather than a thin one. And it is also not every century at once. The clerk counts again, because the first count was interrupted by a visitor. His finger moves along the folded edges. You wait without offering the answer. A correct count belongs to the person responsible for receiving it. Behind him, a shelf holds legal texts and bundles of notes. Some knowledge is carried in complete volumes. Some lives in excerpts, commentaries, questions, and teaching records. Manuscript culture is not a room full of identical books lined like modern print editions. Copies can differ. Margins gather explanations. A student's hand may be less elegant than a master's and still preserve something useful. When the clerk reaches the final sheet, he nods. The bundle has lost none. You recover the carrying cloth, fold the dusty side inward, and place it under your arm for reuse. The carrying cloth is reused because cloth costs money. Almost everything in this trade is kept a little longer than a modern hand would keep it. Returning through the lane, you pass a merchant weighing a small quantity of gold. The amount is restrained, as most transactions must have been. Gold is not strewn across the street as proof of civic importance. Surviving commercial documents show it used as a standard of value in some later regional transactions, while accounts of the city describe gold in circulation. Yet gold's larger significance lies in the network. West African production supplied long-distance demand. Traders, rulers, and communities controlled access, movement, taxation, and exchange. Some gold came toward Timbuktu. Much continued through routes beyond it. The city was powerful because it occupied a useful place in circulation. It was not a vault at the end of the world, and its residents did not spend each morning tripping over treasure. Gold here was value in motion, paying for paper, cloth, horses, and copper. It was a means of settling accounts, not a spectacle lying about the streets. Mediterranean demand pulled gold north, while Saharan salt moved south. Timbuktu sat where the river basin met those routes. Songhai authority forms part of the background to this market day. By the early 16th century, Timbuktu is under Songhai rule, not the Mali Empire of Mansa Musa's 14th century reign. Mali's earlier political and commercial history mattered greatly, and Mansa Musa's pilgrimage helped make the empire known across a broad world. But he is not personally arranging today's book parcel, nor did one ruler single-handedly create Timbuktu's scholarship. Under Askia Muhammad, imperial administration and Islamic learning received support, routes and markets operated within Songhai power, and scholars could advise rulers. The city also retained interests, families and institutions that were not reducible to the court. You pass an official's servant without knowing his business. The market continues around him rather than becoming his procession. Songhai inherited networks that had served earlier states and developed them further. No single ruler invented the routes, and no single ruler could have maintained them alone. At the bookseller's shade, a teacher examines a newly arrived text through its wrapper. He asks about the copyist's hand, the completeness of the work, and whether any leaves were repaired. These questions make the object more than a title. Two manuscripts of the same work can differ in clarity, condition, notes, and trustworthiness. The seller cannot answer everything from the cover, so the wrapper is opened carefully. You place a weight beside the loose edge to stop the wind. The teacher reads several lines, then turns to a later section. He is not dazzled by age. He wants usefulness. A book that cannot be read, trusted, or taught may be rare and still disappoint its buyer. The oldest object in the room is not automatically the one assigned tomorrow's lesson. A teacher judges a manuscript by whether it can be taught from. Age, rarity, and beauty are separate questions, and sometimes irrelevant ones. The teacher notices a correction in the margin. He reads it twice and asks whether it belongs to the original copyist or a later owner. No certain answer is available. The seller says only what he knows. This restraint is part of responsible trade and responsible history. A manuscript can preserve several moments: the main text, a copyist's work, a reader's note, a repair, a family mark, and a later catalogue entry. Not every layer speaks with the same date or authority. You hold the cover open while the two men compare the line with another copy. Their voices remain low. The correction may improve the reading, or it may record a disagreement. Knowledge advances here in a very ordinary posture, with three adults bent over a page, and one of them beginning to feel the complaint in his back. The seller also asks where the volume was acquired, though the answer is incomplete. Provenance can be useful without becoming perfect. A known gap is safer than a confident story created to fill it. Colophons can record who copied a text, for whom, and when. Where a colophon is missing, the honest answer is that the chain of custody breaks there. When the comparison ends, the teacher does not buy the volume immediately. He asks the seller to reserve it while he consults a colleague. The manuscript market depends on trust, but trust does not require haste. You rewrap the book, aligning cloth corners away from the page edges. Outside, the salt merchant has sold part of his load. A porter carries a broken section toward another lane. The two markets proceed at different speeds. Salt can be inspected by weight, fracture, and purity. A manuscript demands questions about text, hand, completeness, authority, and intended use. Gold may settle the price, or some other arrangement may do so. The city's famous goods share streets and networks, not identical methods of valuation. Salt is priced by weight and breakage, gold by purity and quantity, a manuscript by usefulness and condition. Three famous goods, three unrelated kinds of judgment. Gold could pay for paper, cloth, horses, and copper. It was the instrument that let a book bought abroad arrive here at all. By midday, the first caravan animals have been led toward water and rest. Porters stack goods under shade. The market's loudest movement softens, though bargaining continues in pockets. You sit beside the bookseller and clean dust from the low board with a cloth that has clearly accepted its fate. The parcel delivered this morning is now inside a scholar's household. The loose paper has reached a legal clerk. A reserved manuscript waits for a second opinion. None of these outcomes resembles the simple picture of gold traded directly for salt, while books somehow appear as decoration. Instead, there are overlapping chains. Goods arrive from different directions. Payments circulate. Institutions create demand. Skilled people inspect, transport, copy, teach, and preserve. The title answer is becoming a set of actions rather than a slogan. Gold, salt, and books did not make the city by arriving. They made it because enough trained people were waiting to do something specific with each of them. A younger assistant asks why the bookseller from the north wrapped one packet in 2 layers and another in 3. You examine the cloth and answer that the second bundle's outer layer was already worn. The difference tells you about this cloth, not a city-wide custom. No surviving description gives every wrapping habit, ink recipe, market call, clothing color, or turn through an unrecorded lane. What can be said safely is simpler. Paper is fragile. Timbuktu is dry and often dusty. A worn layer offers less protection than a sound one. You fold the frayed edge inward and show the assistant how to keep it away from the paper. He tries once, loosens the fold, and does it again more neatly. The parcel now carries only as much reconstruction as the evidence can bear. A practical hand solving a practical problem. The staging here stays deliberately modest. What the evidence supports is the structure of the trade and the work. The particular afternoon is reconstruction. The bookseller receives word that the morning manuscript has been accepted. The scholar's household requests additional paper for a copy that will begin after the text is checked. One imported book has already generated local work. A copyist will prepare pages, reproduce lines, compare them, and perhaps add a colophon naming the labor, owner, place, or date. Surviving colophons from West African manuscripts sometimes allow modern scholars to trace such histories. They do not reveal every hand or conversation, but they prove that books were made and owned as particular objects. You select a smaller stack of paper and place it beside the afternoon deliveries. The city does not merely store knowledge arriving from elsewhere. It takes a text into use and creates another future object. An imported manuscript often produced a local copy, and the copy sometimes outlived the original. Reception here was productive rather than passive. An active local copying industry existed here, which is the difference between a market that receives books and a city that produces them. This is how Timbuktu became a city of gold, salt, and books. Its position connected desert caravans with the Niger world. Salt came south through costly human and animal transport. Gold moved through wide commercial networks from production regions and served long-distance exchange. Paper and manuscripts arrived with merchants, travelers, and scholars. Then the city added something that geography could not supply by itself. Generations of readers, jurists, teachers, students, copyists, booksellers, families, porters, and craftspeople who gave texts practical lives. The 3 famous nouns did not share one owner, one price, or one route. They met because a functioning city made different movements useful to one another. You tie the next paper packet. The knot is ordinary, but the system depends on ordinary knots holding. The copied page will not erase the imported book's value. It extends it. One object can remain with its owner while its wording enters another household, another lesson, and another set of trained hands. Copying multiplies a text without moving it. That is how a single arriving volume becomes several working ones spread across different households. Afternoon light reaches farther beneath the market awning. The salt stacks are lower. The bookboard is cleaner. A clerk carries away his paper, and a student returns a borrowed text wrapped in cloth. You no longer need to ask what sort of city this is. The answer sits in the movement between them. Trade supports learning. Learning shapes trade and law, and both rely on labor that grand accounts often compress into the word wealth. Some of that labor is free and respected. Some wider trade systems also depend on coercion and enslavement, which cannot be erased from the record and should not be turned into spectacle. The market's prosperity contains unequal lives as well as scholarly achievement. You acknowledge the truth, then return to the worker still carrying the next careful bundle. Enslaved labor worked the salt deposits, and the trade that carried learning also carried coercion. Both belong in the same account, without either cancelling the other. Tagaza's mines depended on labour that was not freely given. The record of learning and the record of coercion come from the same trade. The final delivery of the day is only across the lane. You carry a small packet to a student who has waited beside a column of shade. He checks the name, opens the wrapper, and finds 3 clean sheets. His face relaxes. They may receive copied law, a letter, calculations, or an exercise corrected until the fibres begin to object. Their future remains blank, and that is enough. Timbuktu's commercial position has brought gold, salt, paper, and books into linked circulation. Its scholarly community has made books valuable through use. While market workers have made circulation dependable, the 3 goods have not shared one owner, one route, or one fixed exchange. They have met inside a city, able to connect different kinds of work. You return to the bookseller with empty hands, the market worker's quiet proof that everything has reached someone else. Empty hands at the end of a day are the whole measure of the job. Nothing was dropped, soaked, delayed, or delivered to the wrong man. Beyond the awning, one caravan's salt still carries the memory of a much longer task. Before the slab could rest beside a Timbuktu doorway, someone cut it, loaded it, balanced it, guarded it, watered the animal beneath it, and repeated those duties across the Sahara. We leave the bookseller with his board and follow that labour backward, not into an empty desert, but into a moving community of handlers, guides, merchants, animals, water knowledge, and scheduled rest. A camel kneels beneath a strip of shade. Beside it, an adult handler places both hands on a rope binding 2 pale slabs. His ordinary goal is smaller than crossing a continent. He needs the load to sit evenly when the animal rises. The continent crossing scale belongs to the caravan. His scale is 1 animal, 2 slabs, and the next few hours. No record gives this handler's name, or this particular morning. He belongs to a plausible 16th century journey built from route knowledge and traveller's descriptions. He presses the nearer slab, watches the far rope tighten, and adds a folded pad where the edge might rub. Ibn Battuta, travelling 2 centuries earlier, described thick slabs at Tagaza and reported 2 carried by a camel. That is a useful observation, not a rule for every animal, season, mine, or caravan. Loads vary with slab size, animal strength, water, distance, and judgment. This handler has 2 because the pair can be balanced. He rises, circles the camel, and checks the opposite knot. The animal turns its head with the grave patience of someone who has already received several explanations and found none of them edible. Ibn Battuta recorded thick slabs cut at Tagaza and said a camel carried 2. Observed loads varied, so the number is testimony rather than a standard. The caravan has halted through the fiercest heat. A cloth awning makes a narrow island of shade. Water is measured for people and animals according to the journey's needs, not poured for atmosphere. Route knowledge includes more than a direction south. It includes wells, uncertain wells, ground that tires feet, places where animals can rest, and the time required to reach the next dependable stop. Accounts of Saharan travel describe movement in cooler parts of the day and rest when the sun is high. Such practices were adapted, not mechanically identical across centuries. The handler moistens his mouth, checks the water skin's closure, and waits for the guide's signal. Crossing the Sahara is not one heroic dash. It is a schedule of repeated decisions in which a careless afternoon can become tomorrow's shortage. Movement was timed around heat, and water knowledge was the real expertise. The route is a schedule before it is a distance. Caravans rested beneath awnings and timed stages around the worst heat. The schedule was the technology. At Tagaza, salt was cut from the ground in slabs and prepared for transport. The mining settlement itself depended on provisions carried from elsewhere. Early travelers describe harsh water and buildings made with salt blocks, details that belong to their observed periods and must be used cautiously for a later caravan. One part of the record is not optional. Enslaved workers labored in the salt economy. Their coercion lies within the slab's history, even though the present handler did not cut it, and our story will not turn their suffering into scenery. The load contains extraction, force, skill, distance and risk before the camel takes a step. He runs a hand along the rope, finds a frayed fibre, and replaces the short binding before it is asked to hold under motion. The guide listens, compares the report with memory, and chooses the pace that leaves room for change. The pace is set to protect the animals and the load, rather than to make progress look impressive. Nothing about this is a race. The guide gives the signal. Each handler brings an animal up in sequence. A loaded camel rises in stages. Rear legs first, then front, tilting the slabs through an angle that makes every knot reveal its honesty. The near block shifts. The handler catches the rope, speaks calmly, and waits until the animal stands. He does not pull against the full weight. He guides the slab back while another adult steadies the opposite side. The correction takes less than a minute because the caravan repairs small errors before they become broken loads or injured animals. An impatient man farther down the line calls that they are ready. His camel is not yet standing, which reduces the authority of the announcement. The guide waits for the whole column. A column moves at the speed of its slowest properly loaded animal. Waiting is not lost time, it is what keeps the load intact. The column's discipline is not military. It is the practical result of everyone knowing what a badly loaded animal costs. Once moving, the caravan becomes a line of practiced spacing. Too close, and one animal's hesitation travels backward through the group. Too far apart, and people lose the protection and guidance of the column. The handler walks near the camel's shoulder where he can watch gait and rope together. Sand is only one surface. The Sahara includes gravel plains, hard ground, dunes, salt flats, and approaches shaped by wind and use. The story avoids an endless sea of identical sand because the route's difficulty comes from variation and scarcity, not emptiness as spectacle. A guide reads landmarks, sun, stars, wind, and accumulated experience. Others watch him, but each handler also reads the animal beside him. The camel's shorter step on one side tells of pressure before the slab visibly moves. The column's pace is set by what the loaded animals can sustain, not by the strongest walker. A journey measured only by distance misses the constant negotiation between weight, heat, water, and living bodies. Spacing matters because animals and people need room to correct a shifting load without walking into the next pair. The handler stops the animal at the edge of the column and lifts the rope enough to examine the pad. A corner has crept inward. He loosens one binding, moves the pad, and reties it while the next handler passes. No caravan account preserves this exact repair, but heavy slabs, rope transport, and long distance make such attention reasonable. The firmer ground belongs beneath the larger claim. Salt was mined in slabs, loaded on camels, carried far, and valued partly because transport was difficult. This small adjustment remains a cautious reconstruction rather than a recovered event. When the knot sits flat, he leads the camel back into place. The guide has reduced the pace slightly. Time given to care now may be time saved from unloading a broken slab later. Salt breaks. The slab that cracks in motion has to be repacked or carried in pieces, and either outcome costs more than the padding did. Late in the day, the light lowers and the column lengthens across firmer ground. Conversation becomes brief because breath and attention are better spent on walking. The handler knows the next halt by its approach, though a visitor might see only a subtle change in ground and distant form. Route expertise often looks unimpressive from outside. It is the absence of wrong turns, missed water, and badly timed stops. The caravan's merchants depend on such knowledge, as do the people who will later buy the salt. Transport adds cost at every stage: fodder or grazing where available, water, animals, replacement gear, guards, handlers, time, losses, fees, and risk. By the time a slab reaches Timbuktu, its price carries a long account that may never be written on its surface. Transport is most of the value. The slab is worth what it is worth in Timbuktu, because of everything that happened to it between here and there. Handlers, time, losses, fees, and risk all accumulate into the price. None of that is legible in the slab itself. At the halt, animals kneel in order. The handler keeps one hand on the near slab as the camel lowers itself, first forward, then back. The load stays centered. He leaves the salt tied because the stop is short, but slackens the line that presses the padding. Another worker inspects a water skin. A merchant counts bundles without opening them. A guide speaks with two men about the next stage. Logistics are social memory made visible. No one person holds every task. The caravan works because responsibilities overlap enough to catch an error without becoming so confused that everyone assumes another person checked. The impatient handler from earlier has discovered a loose pack cover and now repairs it quietly. The desert has corrected him without raising its voice. Corrections arrive on their own schedule. A loose cover found now is a repair. The same cover found tomorrow is a loss. Food at the halt must be practical and able to travel. Accounts mention dates, millet, and animal products among provisions in Saharan settlements and journeys. Though availability changes by route and season, nothing requires a feast here. The handler eats a small portion, drinks, and checks the camel again before resting. The animal's breathing is even. The rope has not cut the pad. A fragment has chipped from one slab, leaving a pale grain on the cloth. He brushes it away and saves the fragment with the load rather than wasting it. Salt is valuable, but it is also heavy, brittle matter. Its fame does not make it cooperative, and tonight its smallest broken piece still has to be carried onward. Provisions came in with the caravan because the mining settlements could not supply much. Food, water, and salt all travelled the same difficult ground. As evening cools, the caravan resumes. Stars will help guide the broader direction, while experienced people also use remembered sequences of travel and terrain. We do not need to turn the guide into a mystical figure or pretend that every route was fixed like a paved road. Knowledge is learned, corrected, and shared. The handler follows the animal ahead at a distance that keeps its feet visible. Under cooler air, the camel's pace steadies. The slabs make no sound unless a rope touches their edges. That silence is reassuring. A rubbing noise would mean movement. He listens for it while also hearing bells, sandals, low voices, and the occasional complaint of an animal asked to continue. Attention narrows the night into manageable signs. Night travel is learnt rather than mystical. Sound, footing, and the behavior of the animals are the available instruments, and they are enough. The next water point is reached after darkness has settled. The guide approaches first and confirms conditions. Wells can fail, change, or become crowded, which is why route planning includes alternatives and information from other travelers. The caravan does not descend in disorder. Animals and people are managed so the water source remains usable. Our sources do not provide a universal cue, so the exact order stays undescribed. What matters is restraint. The handler waits, rubbing the camel's neck where the harness does not touch. When their turn comes, he watches how quickly the animal drinks and whether it shows strain. Water is not a picturesque reward at the end of a desert scene. It is the calculation around which the next scene can exist. Water conditions could be difficult even at the mining settlements. Reaching a well is not the end of a problem, but the start of the next calculation. Imported provisions and difficult water are both recorded at the mining settlements. Nothing about the source end of this trade was comfortable. After watering, the caravan rests longer. The handler sleeps near his animal, close enough to hear movement. Rest on a route is never complete in the way rest at home might be. Someone keeps watch. Someone checks a tether. Someone wakes early to test the loads before departure. Yet the work also has rhythm. Repetition lets the body perform familiar tasks with less discussion. Before dawn, the handler feels along the cords in darkness. One knot is damp from the camel's breath. He dries it with cloth and reties it. The slab has not shifted. Around him, other adults begin the same quiet inventory. The caravan rises not as a dramatic army, but as a workplace opening before sunrise. The inventory happens before light, because the loads have to be right before anything moves. Discovering a fault at midday is discovering it too late. Days of travel cannot be compressed into one unbroken ordeal without losing the real work. There are stages that pass cleanly, stages slowed by wind, and stages in which an animal needs relief. The handler's camel develops a tender spot beneath the pad. At the next halt, 2 slabs are removed and set on supports. Another animal may take part of the burden after loads are redistributed. The handler cleans the irritated area and replaces the padding. This costs time, but continuing unchanged would cost more. Caravan efficiency is not relentless speed. It is the ability to preserve animals, people, and goods across distance. The merchant watches the transfer and counts each slab. The handler watches the camel's skin. Both are protecting value, though they measure it differently. Information exchanged at halts can matter as much as a landmark. A report about a crowded well or damaged route changes the next decision before the danger or delay is reached. Reports traveling back along the route are worth as much as landmarks. A crowded well ahead is a fact worth changing plans for. The reduced load changes the camel's gait immediately. The handler notices before the merchant does. He walks beside it for several hundred paces, then nods to the guide. The caravan keeps moving. Historical accounts often summarize this movement with a distance or number of days. Such figures are useful when treated as reports, not universal schedules. Weather, route, water, animal condition, group size, and political circumstances alter travel. The human scale is more reliable here. One day's stage must end with enough strength for another. A salt slab that reaches Timbuktu has survived a chain of decisions in which no single dramatic moment guarantees arrival. The handler's best work appears as nothing happening. No rope breaks, no animal falls, no slab is lost. Success in this work is entirely negative. It consists of the things that did not happen, which is why it leaves so little to describe. Signs of the southern approach accumulate. Traffic increases. News travels between caravans. The guide hears about conditions near the city and adjusts the next halt. Timbuktu is not the final destination for every slab. Some salt will be sold there, some broken or redistributed, and some carried onward through river and overland networks. The city is a node, not a drain into which all trade disappears. The handler understands his contract only through the unloading point. Buyers beyond it belong to another set of workers. This division makes long trade possible. No single person must know every river channel, market custom, mine, and distant consumer. Each knows enough of a segment and enough about the handoff to connect with the next. Timbuktu is a transfer point rather than an origin or a destination. Most of what arrives is going somewhere else afterwards. The river basin position connected several trans-Saharan routes at once. That is what made a transfer point valuable. On the final morning, the camel's load is restored after the tender spot has improved. The handler adds fresh padding and places the sounder slab on the side that seems to rub less. The choice is practical and local. Ahead, traffic from the city includes porters, merchants, animals with lighter loads, and people carrying news north. The caravan's line shortens as the route becomes busier. Officials or brokers may record goods and fees, but procedures varied, and no single checkpoint ritual can stand for every arrival. The handler keeps his attention on the account he can read directly: the rope's angle, the animal's step, and the unbroken edges of the salt. Those details have carried him farther than ceremony would. What happened at arrival in administrative terms is not well recorded. What the handler watches is the rope, the step, and the salt's edges. The city appears as earthen forms and movement, rather than a sudden golden vision. Timbuktu's historical importance has often been buried beneath outsider fantasies of an unreachable place. For the caravan, arrival is practical. The receiving yard, kneeling space, confirming merchant and nearest water matter more than any distant legend. The handler follows a broker into a space beside a merchant's store. Porters spread mats and supports. The camel kneels. This time the handler and another adult remove the bindings completely. They lift each slab enough to free the padding, then guide it down with ropes and hands. The stone is not tossed. Distance has made care habitual. The city at the end of the stage is a working destination, not a marvel. The unloading is the same care the loading was. The merchant counts the slabs and notes one chipped corner. The fragment saved earlier is produced with the load. Its presence does not restore the missing edge, but it shows that the loss came from breakage rather than disappearance. The merchant accepts the delivery. The exact payment for this reconstructed journey is unknown, so it remains outside the doorway. The handler's ordinary goal is complete. 2 balanced slabs have become market stock. Their value now contains mining, coerced labor at the source, animal strength, root knowledge, water, repairs, fees, time, and the repeated care of adults whose names are absent from most grand histories. Salt looks still because all that movement has ended inside it. The slab records nothing about its journey. Everything that made it valuable happened out of sight of the people who will buy it. Transport added greatly to salt's value, which is another way of saying that most of what a buyer pays for is other people's walking. The camel stands without its load and seems briefly surprised by its own height. The handler checks the healed patch and loosens the harness. A porter rolls one slab toward the market lane we visited earlier. Another remains on supports for inspection. The same object now enters a different rhythm of bargaining and distribution. The handler does not follow it. His responsibility has boundaries, and honoring them is part of the system. He leads the camel toward water, carrying the folded pads over one shoulder. Behind him, a broker calls quantities. Ahead, the animal's stride lengthens. The route's great distance contracts into a simple ending. No weight on the back, water nearby, and time to examine every rope before it is needed again. Ropes are checked after the load comes off, while the day's wear is still fresh in the hands that felt it. In a shaded yard, the handler washes salt dust from his hands. The water clouds, clears, and runs into the ground. He hangs the ropes where damaged fibers can be seen in daylight. One length will be repaired, another replaced, and the pads will dry before storage. Tools and gear also carry the route's history. Their maintenance is less famous than the caravan and more useful to the next departure. From nearby lanes comes the lower sound of the city receiving goods. The salt has entered storage. The animal is drinking. The handler's breathing slows. We leave the desert stage with its work complete and move toward another pair of hands, already holding a reed pen above a line that must be copied correctly. 2 kinds of careful work meet in this city without ever needing to understand each other's methods. Before the handler leaves the yard, a bookseller's porter arrives to ask whether the northern bundles included paper. The broker points toward another store. The question links the caravan to the next story without making one animal carry every famous good. Salt and paper may travel in the same broad commercial world while belonging to different merchants, loads and routes. The handler gives no directions because this part of the city is not his expertise. He knows wells, halts, load balance, and the receiving yard. The porter knows booksellers and scholars' lanes. They exchange a greeting and continue toward separate tasks. A network becomes dependable when people know both what they can do and where another person's knowledge begins. Salt and paper travel some of the same roads and then part completely. The network holds because the handoffs are understood, not because the work is similar. The next room is quieter than the yard, but it is not silent. A student reads under his breath, while an adult copyist compares the line before him with an older volume. The year is later in the 16th century, because securely dated Timbuktu copies give firmer ground for this workshop. A length of imported paper has completed the same broad networks as the morning parcel, then entered local hands. The copyist's goal is modest: Finish one useful passage, check it aloud, and leave no uncertainty that a correction belongs to the text rather than to a wandering speck of dust. He lowers the reed pen. The student stops reading. Fresh ink has reached the part of scholarship in which everyone must briefly hold still. The workshop is a room with a lamp, an exemplar, and a person who cannot afford to hurry. That is most of what copying required. The copyist has chosen a passage from a work of Maliki law used in teaching. One securely documented 16th century Timbuktu manuscript tradition includes the Risalah of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, and a surviving copy of another major work bears a 1574 completion date. These facts do not identify the man before us. They allow a careful composite, a trained adult working with a known kind of text in a city where copying was active. He draws the pen toward himself, forming the next letters. The student watches too closely and leans into the light. Without looking up, the copyist shifts the lamp half a hand away. Scholarship has survived many difficult arguments, but it still requires room for the elbow. 16th century copies and their colophons are what anchor this scene. A copy of Ibn Sida's dictionary was finished in 1574. The kind of dated evidence that keeps a room honest. Manuscripts in these collections are written in regionally developed styles of Arabic script. Itself evidence of a tradition adapting rather than merely copying. The writing surface is paper, a traded material whose cost encourages care. The reed pen must hold enough ink for an even stroke without releasing a drop. No surviving note preserves the recipe mixed in this particular room, so its ingredients remain unnamed. What survives across Timbuktu collections is the result. Text on paper, corrections, notes, ownership marks, covers, and sometimes colophons that identify a copyist or date. The copyist pauses after a phrase and compares it with the exemplar. His eyes travel from the older line to the new one, word by word. Copying is not mechanical duplication. Abbreviations must be understood. Similar forms must be distinguished. A phrase can disappear when the eye jumps between matching endings. He checks before the error has time to become respectable. The eye skips between matching line endings, and a whole phrase vanishes without anything looking wrong. Checking is not caution, it is the method. The student reads the completed sentence aloud. Spoken sound gives the copyist another way to test the line. Timbuktu's learnt culture joins written text, memory, recitation, explanation, and correction. A student may memorize a short work or didactic poem, but memorization is not a substitute for every manuscript. The page stabilizes wording, while a teacher supplies context and judgment. The voice catches on one term. The copyist raises a finger, looks again at the exemplar, and finds that his own letter is correct but too crowded. He widens the separation with a careful mark. The student repeats the phrase. This time its structure is clear. Nothing dramatic has been discovered. A possible future misunderstanding has simply been made less likely. Reading aloud, memorizing, commenting, and correcting all work together. The page was one instrument among several, rather than the whole of learning. A second adult enters, carrying 2 sheets that have already been ruled. Preparing a page can require decisions about margins and line spacing before copying begins. Planned layouts survive in manuscript traditions, though the measurements of this particular workshop are unknown. The copyist inspects the ruling. One line curves upward near the bottom. He sets that sheet aside for notes rather than the main text. Paper is too valuable to discard merely because it is imperfect. The straighter sheet goes beneath a protective board. The rejected leaf has not failed, it has been reassigned. In a manuscript room, as in a market, usefulness often depends on matching material to the right task. The second adult takes the note sheet away and returns with another straight leaf. An imperfect sheet is not waste. It becomes notes, drafts, or practice, because paper crossed a desert to get here. The passage concerns obligations in a sale. Law is central to much of the surviving Timbuktu record, and it makes practical sense in a commercial city. Teachers and jurists interpret principles that touch inheritance, loans, property, contracts, and official conduct. The Library of Congress collection also preserves works on commerce in verse, where poetic form aids memory. Our copyist is not handling that later displayed manuscript. He is working within the same broad habit of turning difficult learning into forms students can retain and discuss. He points to a term whose meaning changes the responsibility of a buyer. The student offers an explanation. The copyist asks for the reason. A remembered answer is useful. A reasoned answer is safer. The marginal addition is short enough to remain distinct from the main line. Its placement helps a reader see that explanation and text are related, without pretending they are the same voice. Legal texts addressed exactly the situations merchants met: delayed payment, shared ownership, inheritance, and the terms of a sale. Surviving works cover inheritance, commerce, politics, labor, and agriculture alongside law. The library served a working city. The student cites the teacher's earlier commentary. The copyist nods, then adds a short marginal note in smaller script. Margins can hold glosses, corrections, cross-references, ownership traces, and later voices. They make a manuscript a record of use as well as a container for a main text. Yet not every note can be securely dated or attributed. Modern scholars examine hand, ink, placement, language, and context, but uncertainty remains. The copyist leaves space around his addition so a future reader can see where it belongs. He does not know that centuries later someone may study this page. His intended audience is nearer: the teacher, students, and whoever next needs the passage. Historical survival begins as present usefulness. Nobody copying here is thinking about posterity. The text is being prepared for a lesson that happens tomorrow. A breath of wind reaches the room through the courtyard and lifts the corner of the loose note sheet. The second adult places a smooth weight on it. Dust has already found one fresh line, leaving a pale grain near the final word. The copyist waits. Brushing wet ink would make the damage worse. When the surface is set, he tips the sheet and lets the grain fall away. The word remains readable. Paper, ink, and climate create a sequence of small timing problems. Dry air can help preservation, yet wind and grit punish carelessness. The copyist moves the finished leaf farther from the opening and turns back to the exemplar. His pace is slightly slower now, not from fear, but because the room has reminded him what one hurried hand can do. Fresh ink and moving air are a poor combination. Most of the room's habits exist to protect work that is not yet dry. The lesson shifts from copying to commentary. The student reads a line, then listens while the copyist explains two possible applications. Learned work in Timbuktu was not confined to reproducing imported authority. Scholars interpreted texts in relation to local questions, corresponded across regions, advised rulers, issued legal opinions, and trained successors. Muhammad al-Maghili's answers to Askia Muhammad show a ruler seeking a scholar's guidance on political and religious matters. That exchange does not prove every classroom discussed court policy, but it reveals a world in which texts, authority, and governance met. The copyist brings the discussion back to an ordinary dispute over delayed payment. The student's task is to see how a general rule becomes a careful judgment rather than a slogan. Questions of law reached rulers as well as students. A treatise records the questions Askia Muhammad put to a North African scholar, which is scholarship meeting government directly. The exchange between a ruler and a distant scholar was itself preserved as a text, which is how a question becomes part of a tradition. On a nearby shelf rests a wrapped volume of arithmetic examples. It is not assigned to today's student, and we do not move a known 18th century copy backward in time. Mathematics circulated through the wider Islamic scholarly tradition, and later Timbuktu manuscripts prove sustained study of calculation. For the present workshop, the safest claim is broad. Students and professionals in commercial and legal life needed numerical skill. while surviving collections contain arithmetic works from later centuries. The copyist uses a simple count to plan how many lines remain on the sheet. He marks the place where tomorrow's work may begin. Arithmetic here does not arrive as a surprise from a hidden city. It appears where people keep accounts, divide inheritances, measure obligations, and prepare pages. Arithmetic appears in these collections because people needed it. Shares, debts, and measurements are arithmetic problems before they are anything else. Astronomy requires the same chronological restraint. Timbuktu's manuscripts to preserve astronomical learning, diagrams, seasonal calculations, and observations, but the best-known digitized examples often come from later dates. The 16th century city belonged to a connected Islamic intellectual world in which astronomy mattered for calendars, time, and scholarship. That supports the subject's presence, not this copyist's ownership of a particular surviving chart. He glances toward the courtyard light rather than at the stars. The lamp must be moved before evening work. His practical universe is the drying time of one page, the available light, and the number of lines a student can check without losing attention. Great fields of knowledge are carried forward through such modest limits. Astronomical learning is present in the manuscript record and was studied and adapted here rather than merely received. The copyist turns to the final section of the leaf. He sharpens the reed with a small knife, testing the cut on a scrap rather than on the manuscript page. The tool's exact shape is not claimed from a surviving Timbuktu workshop inventory, but reed pens and controlled nibs belong to Arabic manuscript practice. He wipes the edge, dips lightly, and writes. The student follows from the exemplar. Halfway through the line, the student says a word too soon. The copyist stops before his hand obeys the sound. They compare texts. The student's memory has supplied a familiar phrase that is not present here. He corrects himself and begins again. Oral skill is powerful, which is precisely why it must sometimes be checked against the page. A memorized text can substitute a familiar phrase for the correct one without the speaker noticing. The exemplar exists precisely to catch that. When the line is finished, the copyist marks the correction in the student's notes rather than shaming him. Learning depends on errors becoming visible soon enough to repair. A copied book may require comparison by another reader, especially where meaning turns on a small difference. The student now reads more slowly. His voice finds the exact phrase. The copyist listens with his hand resting beside the ink pot. A teacher in another part of the house answers a question. Someone crosses the courtyard with water. The workshop belongs to a household and a neighborhood, not a sealed academic institution. Timbuktu's learning is distributed among people and places, joined by relationships that modern labels can flatten if used without explanation. Collections sat in households and small institutions rather than one central library. Custody was personal, which is also why so much of it survived. Family libraries were used and safeguarded across generations. Modern cataloguing and digitization now cover many small collections rather than one central archive. The last copied word dries. The adult who brought the ruled sheets returns to compare the new leaf against the exemplar. Two readers now move through it in sequence. They find one crowded letter, the corrected spacing, and the marginal gloss. No word is missing. The copyist adds a small completion mark for this section. A full colophon may eventually record a copyist, owner, place, or date, but not every manuscript preserves one, and not every detail remains readable. What matters tonight is accountability within the room. Another trained person has checked the work. The student has heard the passage twice. The page can enter the gathering tomorrow with its known correction openly marked. A visible correction is more useful than a clean page that hides an error. The next reader needs to know what was changed. The copyist closes the ink vessel and wipes the reed. Loose sheets are placed between boards, so their edges remain protected. The exemplar receives its wrapper. A book in use must be opened, but care determines how often it can be opened again. Household collections in Timbuktu were not merely hidden hoards awaiting modern rescue. They were working libraries held by learned families, teachers, mosques, and local institutions. Their contents varied, their numbers varied, their histories were built through purchase, copying, inheritance, travel, loss, and repair. The copyist returns the legal volume to its place and sets the new leaf apart until fully dry. His task has produced one clean passage, not a mountain of anonymous manuscripts. The tradition is strongly associated with family libraries kept and used across generations. It was never a single hoard waiting to be discovered. Distinctive binding and covering practices mark West African manuscripts. The physical book is regional, not only its contents. What did manuscript learning in Timbuktu look like? In this small room, it looks like imported paper made local through labor. It looks like a known legal text, a copyist comparing lines, a student reading aloud, a margin receiving explanation, and a second adult checking the result. Beyond law, surviving collections preserve theology, grammar, history, commerce, arithmetic, astronomy, medicine, ethics, poetry, and more. Though dates and proportions must be handled carefully, Sangkor and other teaching centers were not one modern university with a single enrollment count. They were parts of an urban scholarly ecology. The payoff is quieter and stronger than the legend. Knowledge lived in relationships among books and people who knew how to use them. Calling it a university imports the wrong picture. Teachers, students, texts, and households were connected by relationships rather than by enrollment. The student repeats the corrected sentence one final time. His pace is even. The copyist listens, then nods and covers the leaf with a clean board. The day's error has not vanished. It remains in the note as evidence of what was corrected. This is useful. A perfect-looking page can conceal uncertain work, while a visible correction may show responsible attention. The lamp is carried a little farther from the manuscripts. Outside, the heat has released its hold on the courtyard walls. The copyist flexes his fingers, places the reed beside the ink vessel, and leaves tomorrow's first sheet ready beneath a weight. The lesson ends with the line stable and the tools in order. Tomorrow's first sheet is already weighted flat. Preparation at the end of a day is what makes the beginning of the next one quiet. The lamp is moved rather than extinguished, because the next sheet is already positioned for morning. Across the courtyard, another adult lifts a wrapped volume from a shelf and checks the wall behind it. A shallow scar has opened in the earthen surface where recent moisture found a weak place. The book is moved before repair begins. Timbuktu's architecture and its manuscripts share no magical immunity to time. Earthen walls endure through skilled maintenance. Paper survives through dry storage, wrapping, handling, and repeated choices. The household member carries the volume to a chest, then returns with a small tool and prepared earth. Evening's goal is practical. Close the wall defect, clear the room, and secure the books before the air cools further. Earthen walls and paper collections share a household and share a vulnerability. Both are attended to in the same evening by the same hands. The household member tests the scar with the tool's edge. Loose material falls onto a cloth laid below. He does not enlarge the opening beyond what must be removed. A local mason has already examined the patch and left prepared material for this small repair. Larger structural work would require greater skill and more hands. UNESCO recognizes Timbuktu's mosques as exceptional earthen architecture sustained by traditional maintenance, and modern conservation work confirms the continuing importance of trained masons. The exact mixture and gesture in this 16th century household are plausible, not documented formula. He dampens the edge lightly, presses earth into the shallow gap, and smooths it flush. The wall changes color where the new material meets the old, making the repair visible until it dries. The color difference is how the household will know the patch is still curing. It disappears as the new earth matches the old. The moved manuscript remains wrapped on the chest across the room. Repair comes first because dust from the wall should settle before books return. The household member gathers the fallen crumbs in the cloth and carries them outside. Earthen construction asks for recurring attention. Rain, drainage, wind, roof condition, and ordinary wear can damage surfaces. Survival does not mean the building has stood untouched since one founding moment. It means generations have inspected, patched, replastered, rebuilt, and adapted. The same is true of the city's major mosques, whose histories include substantial restorations. In this smaller room, the scale is a palm-sized scar and a few minutes of work. He shakes the cloth in the courtyard, away from the doorway, then folds it for washing. Buildings like the city's great mosques survive through exactly this kind of repeated attention. The scale differs. The method does not. Conservation of these buildings involves streets, drainage, and sanitation as much as walls. A wall is only as dry as the ground around it. Back inside, he checks the roofline above the repaired place. No active drip is visible. A stain from earlier moisture has dried. It may have come from brief rain, a roof edge, or water carried too near the wall. Nothing in the room settles the cause. He moves a storage basket farther away, so air can pass behind it. The manuscript chest remains raised from the floor. A sensible precaution, even though no inventory describes this household's furniture. The firmer facts are simpler. Dry climate can favor preservation, but water, dust, insects, handling, and neglect still threaten paper. Care therefore begins with noticing the room, not merely admiring what it contains. He runs his hand near the wall without touching the repaired earth and finds no fresh dampness. Dry conditions help paper, but damp, dust, insects, and handling remain real threats. Checking the room is part of keeping the collection. He opens the chest only after washing and drying his hands. Inside, volumes lie in cloth or leather covers, some complete and some made of smaller gatherings. Timbuktu's modern manuscript work reveals many family libraries, but those holdings cannot be counted backward into this room. The household owns a manageable collection tied to teaching and inheritance. One volume has a loose wrapping cord. He lifts it, supports the lower edge, and sets it on the mat. The cord has not broken. Its knot has worked open through handling. He checks the cover and page block without forcing them flat. Nothing has shifted. A fresh length of cord is unnecessary. He can retie the sound one and preserve the old material's service. Cords, cloths, and covers are reused as long as they hold. Replacing what still works is not thrift here, only ordinary sense. Nothing here is discarded while it still functions. The household's collection survives partly because its wrappings were treated as worth keeping. The cloth wrapper is unfolded far enough to inspect the outer leaves. A small line of dust lies along one edge. He lifts it away with a clean, soft cloth. No household conservation manual survives to prescribe the gesture, but gentle removal fits the ordinary need to protect dry paper from grit. He does not turn through the text for pleasure, because tonight's task is storage. Books survive partly through use, and partly through knowing when not to add unnecessary handling. The volume may carry law, devotion, language, or commentary. Its title need not be supplied. He folds the wrapper so no dusty face touches the pages, draws the cord around it, and makes a knot that lies beside, rather than upon the page edge. The volume is ready for the chest again. The knot sits beside the page edge rather than on it, because pressure in the wrong place is what creases a leaf permanently. A younger adult from the household brings the writing boards from the lesson room. The finished leaf remains between them. Together they choose a dry shelf away from the repaired patch. This shared decision matters more than assigning one heroic keeper to the collection. Family libraries endure through distributed knowledge. Who owns a text, who may lend it, where it rests, how it is wrapped, and which reader can identify a problem. Modern projects find manuscripts still associated with learned families and mosque libraries, evidence of long traditions of custody, even though individual histories vary. The two adults place the boards flat and leave space above them. The fresh ink will not be pressed by another object tonight. He also looks along the base, where fallen earth would collect first. The cloth beneath the repair remains nearly clean, showing that the new material has stayed in place during the first part of drying. West African manuscripts have distinctive covering and binding practices, and the wrapping is part of the book rather than packaging around it. The wall repair has begun to lose its wet shine. The household member touches the edge, not the center, and finds it holding. He cleans the small tool before earth hardens on it. Skilled maintenance includes care for the implements that will be needed again. Outside, a mason passes through the courtyard and glances at the patch. He gives a brief approval, then checks the wall from the other side. No larger crack appears. Their actions are quiet because the problem is small and has been addressed early. Earthen architecture can look soft beside stone, yet softness is not weakness when a community understands renewal. The wall remains useful because its material can be read, repaired, and returned to service. A material that can be renewed is not fragile. Masons here hold specialized knowledge of exactly that renewal, and it is passed on deliberately. Masons preserve this knowledge as a community practice, and reconstruction work has depended on exactly those hands. Attention moves from the wall to the doorway. Wind has pushed a thin ridge of sand against the threshold. The younger adult sweeps it outward, while the elder checks that no loose cloth edge trails from the chest. Dust cannot be banished from Timbuktu, only managed. The goal is not a sealed modern archive. It is a room kept dry and orderly enough for books to remain usable. UNESCO notes that aridity can aid survival, while present-day collections also show the harm caused by poor storage, insects, damp, and physical wear. Those observations do not let us invent 16th century humidity readings. They support the household's ordinary caution. The threshold clears. Air still enters, but less grit waits to travel with the next footstep. Perfect protection is not available. Reducing what enters the room is the whole of what can actually be done. One book remains outside the chest because it will be used again in the morning. The elder places it on a raised shelf and covers it with cloth. Storage balances access with protection. A volume buried too deeply may be preserved, but unavailable. A volume left open gathers damage. The household's decisions follow expected use. The legal text returns to the lesson room. A less frequently consulted work goes into the chest. Loose notes are tied together by subject as their readers understand it. No evidence makes this arrangement a universal Timbuktu catalogue. It answers the narrower need to keep related leaves from separating. The younger adult repeats which bundle is wanted first tomorrow, and the elder confirms its place before lowering the chest lid. Order is arranged around use rather than around any catalogue. What is needed first sits where it can be reached first. The room now holds fewer exposed objects. Ink is closed, pens are dry, boards lie flat. The repair tool rests clean beside the wall materials. Wrapped books sit clear of the new patch. Each completed action reduces tomorrow's uncertainty. If rain comes, the scar is filled. If a student arrives early, the assigned text can be found. If dust enters, covers take the first contact. The city's intellectual history depends on grander events, political shifts, teachers, travel, and trade. But it also depends on evenings like this one. Preservation is not a pause outside history. It is work within history, performed before anyone knows which page a distant century may later value. Nobody tonight is preserving heritage. They are putting the books away properly, which turns out to be the same activity. The manuscripts of Timbuktu are a locally valued inheritance rather than a recent discovery. They were being looked after long before anyone arrived to catalogue them. The two adults close the chest. The lid settles without catching cloth. The cord around the chest is tightened enough to hold, not enough to strain the wood. The repaired wall remains uncovered so air can reach it. From elsewhere in the household comes the low movement of evening. Water set down, a mat straightened, A final passage repeated from memory. No new lesson begins. The work already opened during the day is being brought to rest. The manuscript delivered in the market, the paper counted by the clerk, and the copied legal line all belong to a city whose knowledge survives through circulation and custody together. What moves must arrive. What arrives must be used. What is used must sometimes be put away. Circulation and custody are the same practice seen at different moments. A collection that is never used stops being a collection. In the courtyard, the mason washes earth from his hands. The household member pours only what is needed, then sets the vessel aside. They inspect the outside surface once more. The patch is modest, darker than the surrounding wall and already firm at its edges. Tomorrow it can be checked again. The tools are carried beneath shelter. A remaining lump of prepared earth is covered, so it will not dry too quickly before another small repair. The city has always required such knowledge from its builders and residents. Monumental mosques make the skill visible on a large scale, but households also depend on people who understand material, weather, and timing. The mason leaves through the gate with no ceremony. The wall stays behind and continues drying. The repair will be checked again in daylight. Earthwork is judged after it has had a night to settle. The elder returns to the manuscript room carrying the lamp. He places it where heat and flame remain clear of cloth and paper. The younger adult checks the shelf one final time, then draws the doorway covering partly across. The room is not sealed. It is simply settled. A wrapped book rests beside the boards, holding the fresh leaf. Cord crosses cloth. The wall patch darkens in the lower light. Outside, a salt slab lies near a merchant's doorway, no longer moving. Farther away, a caravan animal stands without its burden. The day's chains of trade, study and maintenance have reached their separate endings. The elder lowers the lamp's flame until the room holds only enough light to leave safely. Wall, page and chest have each been left in a finished state. Nothing in the room is waiting on anyone. The lamp goes low rather than out, because the new earth and the fresh ink both want a quiet night. The room keeps the shapes already placed within it. Paper lies between the flat boards. Cord rests across folded cloth. The lamp stands apart from the wrapped books, its flame lowered, its light touching only the nearest edge of the shelf. Along the wall, the repaired patch remains darker than the earth around it. No hand returns to test it. No page is opened. The copied line has been read, corrected, checked and covered. Its work for the evening is complete. Beyond the doorway, the courtyard holds the last warmth of the day. A clean tool rests beneath shelter. The cloth used for dust has been folded. The chest is closed without cloth caught beneath its lid. Each object remains where the household left it, not displayed, not forgotten, simply ready to be found again after the room has passed through darkness. Near the market doorway, the salt slab has also stopped travelling. Its ropes are gone, its supporting mat lies flat, and the chipped edge faces inward. Earlier, hands lifted and guided it. An animal balanced it. A handler checked the pressure beneath it, and a porter rolled it through the lane. Those movements are finished images now, already known and adding nothing further. The pale surface holds a little dust. Beside it, an empty carrying cloth has been folded with the worn side inside. The lane no longer needs to open for a loaded camel. There is space between the wall and the settled stone. Farther within the city, paper rests beneath its own cord. Salt and book remain separate objects in separate keeping, joined only by the day's remembered paths through hands, shade, and careful arrival. The lamp's small light reaches the wrapper of the book left for morning. It does not reach the writing hidden inside. The page needs no more reading tonight. The knot beside its edge lies flat. The boards above the fresh leaf keep their quiet weight. Across the room, the wall patch continues to dry without attention. Its darker shape is easy to see, then less easy as the flame lowers again. The courtyard beyond the covering is still present in outline. The water vessel set down, the swept threshold, the sheltered tools, the chest against the dry part of the room. Nothing has changed places. The day's dust remains outside the folded cloth. The fresh ink remains inside the boards. The repaired earth remains inside the shallow scar. Each material has been given the simple boundary that was prepared for it. The market parcel can be remembered at the instant it reached the clean mat. The outer cloth opened. The inner wrapper stayed firm. A hand checked the title, another confirmed the count, and the cord was tied again. That motion rests beside the later image of the copied line beneath a board. The caravan load rests beside the loosened harness and folded pads. The repaired wall rests beside the cleaned tool. Arrival has several quiet forms. An object passed to the correct hand, a slab lowered without breaking, a sentence completed without a missing word, a patch holding at its edges, a book returned to dry cloth. These are not new events. They are the settled ends already reached, placed together now without hurry. The lamp remains low. The courtyard remains open above. The wrapped book remains closed. At last there is the courtyard, the wall, the lamp, the cord, the paper, and the salt beyond the room. The repaired earth has no further task tonight. The folded wrapper holds its shape. The writing boards remain level. The chest stays closed. In the market lane, the slab keeps its place beside the doorway. In the yard, the washed ropes hang without weight. The images no longer travel from one to another. They remain separate and familiar. A hand releasing a parcel, a camel standing after unloading, a reed pen set down, a tool cleaned of earth, a book covered before the light is lowered. The room grows dim around these completed actions. The lamp becomes a smaller point beside the wall, then only a soft glow on the nearest cloth. Paper stays beneath cord. The courtyard stays quiet. The final light rests there without asking anything else to begin.